of you recognize this lovely lady? It's an anglerfish. I think she'll swim for us. Usually lives in the deep sea, but was spotted near the surface and caused this big splash, forgive me, on social media. There were bits and hot takes. There were ballads written. This was one of many, I assure you. And it makes sense because this is a creature that has a face for socials, obviously. It's really freaking weird looking, obviously. And that might seem trivial and like a joke, but actually it gets to this kind of profound evolutionary biology history, which is something that we talked about on Science Friday, the radio show that I host.
Obviously, these are really strange-looking creatures. For me, they're hideous, but also, like, I can't look away. I understand that your research may help explain why anglerfish look this way.
Yes, yeah. So I was part of this larger research team that was interested in reconstructing first the evolutionary history of anglerfishes, and then asking the question that we all kind of wondered is, you know, how and why did the deep sea anglerfish get so weird?
That's a question that the marine biology community wonders about?
Yeah, all the time. And it's not just anglerfish that are doing this. Like, lots of fish go deep and get super weird and freaky, and we don't have a clear answer why.
So this dropped us into this kind of interesting science, and you might still wonder, though, like, with all of the pressing news that is going on, like, is this really the best way to use your platform? And I think that's a valid question, and I just want to make the case. So I think that trust in science is critical for people's lives. I think it's critical for democracy, and I think it's critical for the future of life on this planet. And what I know from reporting on science for the last 20 years is that it does not work to wag your finger at people and tell them, you better listen to this because it's important. You have to not just inform people, you have to connect with people. At least in this medium, you have to find points of connection, and I think this is what Science Friday really does well. So Science Friday, just to zoom out, we have a lot of initiatives, but our flagship thing is a daily audio podcast and a weekly public radio broadcast. We're on over 500 stations across the country. That's more than we've ever been on. We reach 2 million people every week, and we have been around for a long time. The show was founded 34 years ago by this guy, Ira Flato. If you have heard the show in 3 decades, you have heard Ira's voice, and you might not recognize the person next to him, but that was me when I was young and my, inner light hadn't been snuffed out. And I was sitting next to Ira when I was young 20 years ago because Science Friday was my first journalism job out of college. I was an intern and stayed for 8 years and worked my way up to fill and host, and then left the nest and worked on other projects like Bill Nye's Netflix show, and I made a series of science documentaries that lost an Emmy to Oprah, my crowning professional achievement. And I started my own podcast, which invited listeners to be in conversation with experts, which is the thing that I really care about. So, as you might imagine, being back where I started is very, it's personally meaningful for me. It feels like more than a job. And the thing that gets me up every morning, and now also in the middle of the night, is thinking about how Science Friday stays in front of listeners for the next 34 years. And the reason I'm so animated by this is because, I know this is a cliche, but I really believe it, I think the work we are doing now has never been more important. I truly believe that this is Science Friday's moment to step all the way up. And, of course, it's a very tenuous time for media and for science, I don't need to tell you. But it's not just that, it's this broader ecosystem that we're living in where it's harder and harder to find trustworthy information, and it's also, there's declining trust in experts and institutions and in science. And I know this is like a big dream, but I'm also like, if you're not dreaming big, what are you doing? I really think Science Friday is poised to make an impact here because we have a pretty big listener base, and because our listeners tell us they trust us. When we survey them, 97% say they trust us above other news sources, which is pretty cool for a science show, especially. But to have the kind of impact that I really want us to have, and that I think, frankly, we need to have, we need to reach more people. We need to reach a lot more people. And we need to reach new audiences, underserved audiences, and very, very crucially, we need to reach younger audiences. Now, there's no obvious, simple formula for that, but I'm very focused on our podcast. I also know that you can't just put your radio show on Apple Podcasts and expect young people to flock to it. You have to program for the audience you want, which is why I pay attention to anglerfish memes. That episode ended up being in the top 3 most listened to episodes of the last 6 months. And there's one more thing I want to talk about, which is our relationship with our audience. Because I think, for me, this is the thing that Science Friday does differently. It's the thing that sets us apart, and I think it's a little bit of our secret sauce. So for almost all of time, Science Friday was a live call-in show. That meant that between the hours of 2 and 4 p.m. on Fridays, if you were listening, you would pick up your phone. Isn't this quaint? You would dial, you would talk to a human being, and maybe you would get on the air. And what you might imagine, of course, is true, is that it limits who is going to be in that conversation and on the show to the people who are listening to the radio between 2 and 4 p.m. on a Friday. We are now pre-producing the show, and one of the things that I'm working very hard on and I'm very interested in is finding new ways to let our listeners be on the show. And so we have a toll-free number now. You can call us in the middle of the night, and many do. You can text us. You can slide into my DMs or the DMs of our social channels. You can record your voice memo right in the Instagram app, and it can be on the show. And as you might imagine, it is changing the sound of our show. And I'll give you a quick example. This is a story we did about TikTok and mental health. And if you're on TikTok, you might have been served a video like this. It's sort of like, did you lose your keys? Did you misplace your hat? You might have ADHD. And yes, it does have that like used car vibe. The producers pitched this to me because researchers looked into this story and found that there was a lot of misinformation in these videos. And I was like, this is not a story. Of course we know that. What are we gonna do? We're a talk show, what are we gonna talk about? And they were like, Flora, respectively, you're actually too old to understand this. And they're right. I mean, I'm an elder millennial. I spend very little time on TikTok. And they were like, not only should we do this, let's open the phones, let's get callers and get their stories. So we did that, and again, of course, I was totally wrong. The phones lit up, tons of people called, and they weren't the usual suspects. They were younger listeners, and they had stories that made our coverage much more interesting and complicated.
Hi, my name is Julieta, and I am calling from Oxnard, California, calling to let you know that I finally found my people with ADHD based off of TikTok videos that I was watching, and feeling relieved and overwhelmed, and just, I'm at a loss for words. I cried. That's all I can say, is that I cried to finally realize that.
We got a lot of calls from people like Julieta. We called Julieta back and got the whole story. She had seen these TikTok videos, went to a clinician, got a formal diagnosis, and her life was profoundly changed. She went back to school. She had a whole new way of understanding herself. And the thing that is so interesting to me as a journalist is I looked up this story to see how other outlets covered it after we did it, and a lot of outlets covered it, and it was mostly the very straight-ahead version. Researchers find that you can't trust, the videos that you see on TikTok about mental health. And what we ended up with by centering not just the expert voice, but putting that voice in conversation with our audience was a story that was more nuanced, that was more interesting, that was more emotional, and I think more true. And so when I think about trust and these like huge problems we're facing with trust in media, and I'm gonna say this, I say this with humility, because this is just my hypothesis and my perspective, but I think when I think about those huge problems and when I think about why Science Friday has such a high trust rating, I think this might be part of it. We actually wanna know what our audience thinks. They are not a prop. They are not a gimmick. They are not there to add texture. We respect them. And I think it must be part of the reason that they respect and trust us. And so, this is my hypothesis. I think as we look forward to the next 30 years of Science Friday, these are the experiments that I want to do in connection, in collaboration, and if I'm dreaming big, hopefully learn something about some of these big challenges that we face. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I appreciate it.